What if I told you that the biggest extortion scheme of modern times isn't happening in dark alleys, with hooded men demanding money in exchange for protection? What if I could prove to you that this practice is happening right now, at this very moment, in glass-walled boardrooms, with impeccably suited executives smiling for cameras while draining billions of dollars from the real economy? Would you believe me? Probably not. And that's exactly how they want you to think. When we talk about the mafia, about extortion, about schemes to get rich illegally, our minds automatically drift to movies like The Godfather, to stories of Italian gangsters or violent cartels. We imagine whispered threats, briefcases full of cash, and deals made in the shadows. But here is the uncomfortable truth that very few people have the courage to say out loud. The most profitable tactic of corporate bosses today is an almost perfect copy of the old mob: vest, pay up, or get hurt, except it gets completely legalized. And the worst part, it's being used against you, against me, against all of society, right under our noses. Have you ever felt this way? Ever felt that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much effort you put in, there's something structural preventing wealth from reaching you? That the rich keep getting richer while the rest of the population spins its wheels in the same place? Well, that's not just a feeling. There's a specific mechanism, a well-oiled financial machine that transfers trillions of dollars from workers, consumers, and the productive economy into the pockets of a tiny elite. And this mechanism has a name: stock buybacks. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely change the way you see modern capitalism, big corporations, and even your own salary that hasn't gone up in years. For decades, stock buybacks were considered market manipulation. They were prohibited, illegal. The SEC, the regulatory body overseeing the American financial market, treated this practice as fraud. And it made sense. When a company uses its own money to buy back its own shares, it's artificially inflating the price of those stocks. It's like a poker player who manages to increase the value of their own chips in the middle of a game. There's no real value creation, no innovation, no job creation. There's just a transfer of wealth to those who already own shares, meaning mostly executives and major shareholders. But in 1982, something changed. A seemingly technical rule, known as Rule 10b-18, opened the floodgates. And since then, American corporations, and later those around the world, discovered the ultimate gold mine. They no longer needed to invest in research. They didn't need to improve products. They didn't need to value their employees. All they had to do was buy back their own stock, inflate prices, and collect the million-dollar bonuses tied to market performance. What you're about to discover might surprise you. We're talking about trillions of dollars. Not billions, trillions. Money that could be funding technological breakthroughs, creating quality jobs, raising wages, or being reinvested in the real economy. But instead, it's being funneled to enrich a handful of people at the top of the pyramid. And the most disturbing part? All of this happens in broad daylight, with the blessing of governments and the complicit silence of mainstream media. Because when the biggest advertisers are these very corporations, who's going to have the courage to expose the scheme? But here, we're going to have that courage. And what comes next will show you exactly how this machine works. Now, before we dive deeper into the mechanics of the system, into the names, the numbers, and the exposed lies, I need to pause for just a moment. Not to break the flow, but because what we're building here is bigger than just one video. See, here's the thing. Topics like this don't get talked about on mainstream channels. They don't trend on social media. They don't get pushed by algorithms, and there's a reason for that. The people who benefit from this scheme are the same people who fund the platforms, who buy the ads, who shape what gets seen and what gets buried. So when a video like this actually reaches you, it's almost a small miracle. And the only way it reaches more people, the only way this conversation grows, is through you. If anything I've said so far resonates with you, if you've ever felt that frustration of working harder every year while your paycheck stays the same, if you've ever wondered why the stock market keeps breaking records while everyday people struggle to make ends meet, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what part of this hit home. Because this isn't just my channel, this is our space to have conversations that actually matter, conversations that nobody else wants to have. And if you're finding value in this, if you want to see more content that pulls back the curtain on how the system really works, take 2 seconds to hit that like button. It sounds small, but it's not. Every like, every comment, every share tells the algorithm that this content deserves to be seen. It's how we fight back against the silence. It's how we make sure this message doesn't disappear into the void. And if you're new here, if this is your first time on this channel, consider subscribing. Not because I'm asking you to, but because if this kind of truth-telling matters to you, you'll want to be here for what's coming next. We're just getting started. Alright, now that we're in this together, let's get back to it. Because what I'm about to show you goes even deeper than you might expect. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because to truly understand what's happening today, we need to take a journey back in time. And not to some boring economics lecture. I'm talking about a story of power, control, and manipulation that started long before any of us were born. Let me take you back to the 1920s, Prohibition era. The United States government had just made alcohol illegal, and overnight, an entire industry went underground. Now here's where it gets interesting. A man named Al Capone saw something that most people missed. He understood a fundamental truth about human behavior and economics. When you control the supply of something people desperately want, you control the price. And when you control the price, you control everything. Capone didn't just sell bootleg liquor, he engineered scarcity. He made sure that alcohol was hard to get, that the supply was always tight, always uncertain. And because of that artificial scarcity, people were willing to pay outrageous prices. They were willing to accept his terms. They were willing to look the other way when things got violent. The psychology behind it was simple but devastatingly effective. Create fear of missing out, limit access, and watch the value skyrocket. Capone became one of the richest and most powerful men in America using this exact playbook. Now here's where the hidden truth starts to reveal itself. Fast forward almost 100 years and the same exact playbook is being used today. Not by gangsters in pinstripe suits, but by CEOs in designer ties. Not in smoky speakeasies, but in gleaming corporate headquarters. The product isn't whiskey anymore, it's stocks. And the mechanism of control isn't Tommy guns and threats. It's something far more sophisticated, far more invisible, and far more devastating in its impact. When a corporation announces a massive stock buyback program, what they're really doing is engineering scarcity. Think about it. There's a fixed number of shares of any company floating around in the market. When the company itself starts buying back those shares and retiring them, the supply shrinks. Fewer shares available means each remaining share becomes more valuable, at least on paper. It's the exact same logic Capone used. Control the supply, control the price. The only difference is that yesterday we called it crime. Today we call it financial strategy. And this is where the transformation of our entire economic system begins to make sense. See, for most of the 20th century, corporations grew by actually growing. They invested in research and development. They built new factories. They hired more workers. They created products that people wanted to buy. Real value, real impact, real economic activity that lifted communities and created a middle class that could afford homes, cars, college education for their kids. That was the deal. That was the American dream we were all sold. But somewhere along the way, a decision was made. A quiet decision behind closed doors, in the boardrooms and the halls of power. The decision was this: why go through all the trouble of actually building something when you can just manipulate the numbers? Why invest in innovation when you can inflate your stock price with a simple accounting trick? Why share the wealth with workers when you can funnel it directly into the pockets of executives and shareholders? This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate shift in mindset, a fundamental change in how corporations viewed their purpose. And the revelations that came out of this shift are staggering when you start to connect the dots. Here's something most people don't realize. Executive compensation used to be mostly salary. A CEO would get paid a lot, sure, but it was a fixed amount. Then, starting in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s and 2000s, a new model emerged. Executives started getting paid primarily in stock options. Their compensation became directly tied to the stock price. And suddenly, the incentives completely changed. It was no longer about building a great company. It was about making the stock price go up by any means necessary. And what's the fastest, easiest, most guaranteed way to make a stock price go up? Not innovation that's risky and takes years. Not expansion that requires capital and patience. No, the fastest way is to simply buy back your own stock, reduce the supply, and watch the price climb. It's almost mathematical in its certainty, and it's completely legal. The behind-the-scenes reality of modern corporate America is that trillions of dollars that could have gone into wages, into benefits, into research, into the kind of investments that create real prosperity for real people. All of that money has been redirected into stock buybacks, into making the rich richer, into perpetuating a system where the gains flow upward and the losses flow downward. And the impact of this goes far beyond just numbers on a spreadsheet. It affects your job security. It affects whether you get a raise this year. It affects whether your company invests in training or just cuts costs to boost quarterly earnings. It affects the entire fabric of our economy and our society. If you're starting to see the pattern, if these revelations are clicking into place for you, drop a comment below. Just write, "Now I see it," because once you see this, you can't unsee it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the history is only half the journey. The real revelation comes when you see how seamlessly these old tactics were transformed and repackaged for the modern world. And trust me, once you see this connection, the way you look at corporate America will never be the same. Think about how the classic mafia protection racket worked. A couple of guys would walk into a small business, a bakery, a laundromat, a corner store. They'd look around, maybe compliment the place, and then they'd make an offer. "Pay us a little something every month, and we'll make sure nothing bad happens to your shop. We'll protect you." Of course, the hidden truth everyone understood was that the only threat to the business was the very people offering protection. It was elegant in its cruelty. Create the problem, then sell the solution. The merchant had no real choice. Pay up or face the consequences. Now here's where the transformation gets fascinating. Wall Street looked at this model and thought, how can we do the same thing, but on a massive scale, without the messy violence, without the legal risk, and with complete social acceptability? And the answer they found was stock buybacks combined with a carefully crafted narrative about market stability and shareholder value. See, the modern version works like this. Corporations don't walk into your shop with threats. Instead, they've built an entire system where your retirement depends on the stock market. Your pension, your 401k, your sense of financial security, it's all tied to stock prices going up. And once that dependency is established, the dynamic shifts completely. Now, when a corporation announces a massive buyback program, they're not just manipulating their own stock price. They're positioning themselves as the guardians of your financial future. They're promising stability. They're promising growth. They're promising that if you just trust the system, everything will be fine. But here's the decision point that nobody talks about. When a company takes billions of dollars and uses it to buy back shares, where does that money come from? It comes from the same pool that could have gone to raising wages. It comes from the budget that could have funded research and development. It comes from the resources that could have been used to improve working conditions, expand operations, or lower prices for consumers. Every dollar spent on buybacks is a dollar not spent on anything that creates real value in the real economy. And the impact of this choice cascades through the entire system. Let me walk you through the behind-the-scenes mechanics of how this actually plays out. A company announces a $10 billion buyback program. Wall Street cheers. The stock price jumps. Executives, whose compensation packages are heavily weighted towards stock options and performance bonuses tied to share price, suddenly see their net worth increase by millions, sometimes hundreds of millions, overnight. They didn't build anything new. They didn't innovate. They didn't create a single job. They just authorized a financial maneuver that transferred wealth from the company just balance sheet directly into their own pockets. But where does the risk go? This is the part that should make your blood boil. The risk gets transferred downward, always downward. When a company loads up on debt to finance buybacks, that debt becomes a vulnerability. When the next economic downturn hits, when revenues drop, when times get tough, who pays the price? Not the executives who already cashed out their stock options. Not the major shareholders who sold at the inflated peak. No, it's the workers who get laid off. It's the communities that lose jobs when plants close. It's the consumers who face higher prices as companies try to maintain margins. It's the taxpayers who end up bailing out corporations deemed too big to fail. The mindset behind all of this is what truly reveals the hidden truth of modern capitalism. There is a term economists use called quarterly capitalism, the relentless focus on short-term stock price performance at the expense of long-term value creation. But I think that term is too generous. What we're really looking at is a systematic extraction machine, a way to pull wealth out of companies, out of the labor force, out of the productive economy, and concentrate it in the hands of a tiny elite. And the most insidious part, It's all dressed up in the language of responsibility. Corporations talk about returning value to shareholders as if it's some kind of noble obligation. They frame buybacks as efficient capital allocation. They hire PR firms and economists to explain why this is actually good for everyone. But strip away the jargon, strip away the sophisticated financial terminology, and what you're left with is remarkably simple. It's extortion without weapons, violence without blood, crime without criminals. The old mob boss would be amazed at what these corporate titans have accomplished. Capone had to worry about FBI raids, about rivals, about the constant threat of imprisonment. These modern practitioners of financial extraction face none of those risks. They sit on boards of prestigious institutions. They get profiled in glossy magazines. They give commencement speeches about hard work and innovation. And all the while, the money keeps flowing upward, and the rest of us are left wondering why we cut unseen to get ahead, no matter how hard we try. If you're feeling that sense of revelation right now, if the pieces are starting to fit together in a way they never did before, you're not alone. Comment below with just one word, rigged, because that's exactly what the system is. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what I'm about to share with you is the kind of revelation that changes everything. This is the moment where the hidden truth becomes undeniable, where the behind-the-scenes reality of corporate America gets exposed in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Here's a fact that will stop you in your tracks. Stock buybacks, this practice that has become so normalized, so accepted, so celebrated on Wall Street, it was illegal in the United States for most of the 20th century. Let that sink in for a moment. The very thing that corporations now spend trillions of dollars on every single year was once considered a crime, and not just any crime. It was classified as market manipulation. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the government body whose entire purpose is to protect investors and maintain fair markets, explicitly prohibited companies from buying back their own shares because doing so was understood to be a form of fraud. Think about what that means. The smartest financial minds of the early and mid-20th century looked at this practice and said, "No, this is wrong. This distorts the market. This misleads investors. This allows insiders to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else." They saw through the scheme and they banned it. For decades, American capitalism operated under the understanding that certain tactics were simply off limits, that there had to be rules to prevent the most powerful players from gaming the system, and then 1982 happened. A single rule change, Rule 10b-18, quietly passed by the SASEC under the Reagan administration, transformed everything. Almost overnight, what had been forbidden became not just legal, but encouraged. The floodgates opened. And the journey we've been on ever since has led us to a place where corporations now view buybacks not as an occasional tool, but as their primary financial strategy. The impact of this transformation on the American economy has been nothing short of catastrophic. Since that rule change in 1982, corporations have spent well over $10 trillion on stock buybacks. 10 trillion. That's not a typo. That's a number so large it's almost impossible to comprehend. To put it in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of most countries. That's enough money to have rebuilt every piece of crumbling infrastructure in America multiple times over. That's enough to have funded research that could have cured diseases, developed clean energy, created entire new industries. But instead, where did all that money go? It went to artificially inflating stock prices. It went to enriching executives whose compensation was tied to those prices. It went to rewarding shareholders who were already wealthy. It got extracted from the productive economy and concentrated at the very top of the wealth pyramid. And here's the revelation that should make you furious. The same corporations, the same CEOs, the same executives who authorize these massive buyback programs, they are the ones who turn around and tell their workers there's no money for raises. They're the ones who claim they can't afford better healthcare benefits. They're the ones who say training programs are too expensive, that mental health support isn't in the budget, that they have to lay off thousands of employees to remain competitive. The absurdity of this mindset is almost beyond belief. A company will announce that they're letting go of 5,000 workers to cut costs, and in the same quarter, they'll spend $10 billion on buybacks. They'll freeze wages citing economic uncertainty, while simultaneously dumping money into a scheme that does nothing but make rich people richer. They'll close factories and communities that have depended on those jobs for generations, all while their stock price hits record highs and their executives collect bonuses that would take an average worker several lifetimes to earn. This isn't a financial tool. Let's stop calling it that. Let's stop using the sanitized language that Wall Street has created to disguise what's really happening. Stock buybacks are a wealth extraction mechanism, pure and simple. They are a way to systematically drain resources from companies, from workers, from the real economy, and funnel them upward. They are the modern equivalent of the protection racket, the shakedown, the extortion scheme, except they've been given a veneer of legitimacy that makes them invisible to most people. The decisions being made in these boardrooms are not about building great companies. They're not about innovation or competitiveness or creating value for society. They are about one thing and one thing only: transferring as much wealth as possible from the many to the few before anyone catches on. And the really twisted part: these executives have convinced themselves that they're doing nothing wrong. They've internalized a philosophy, a set of beliefs, that tells them maximizing shareholder value is the only responsibility a corporation has. They genuinely believe that enriching themselves and their fellow shareholders is not just acceptable, but virtuous. The transformation in corporate mindset has been so complete that they can look at the devastation their practices cause, the lost jobs, the stagnant wages, the hollowed out communities, and feel nothing. Because in their worldview, none of that matters. Only the stock price matters. If you're starting to see how deep this goes, if you're realizing that the system isn't broken, but actually working exactly as designed for the people at the top, comment below with 2 words: wealth extraction, because that's exactly what we're witnessing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it's time to bring everything together. It's time to reach the verdict. And once you see how all these pieces connect, the hidden truth becomes impossible to deny. What we're looking at isn't just corporate greed or bad behavior by a few bad actors. This is a system, a refined, perfected, institutionalized system that operates exactly like organized crime, except it's been given the blessing of legality. Let me walk you through this revelation step by step, because when you see the parallels laid out clearly, the pattern becomes undeniable. First, consider the creation of artificial scarcity. Remember what we talked about with Al Capone and Prohibition? The mob understood that controlling supply was the key to controlling price. When you make something rare, people will pay more for it. Stock buybacks operate on this exact same principle. When a corporation buys back its own shares, it's deliberately reducing the supply of available stock. Fewer shares in circulation means each remaining share becomes more valuable. It's manufactured scarcity, pure and simple. There's no new product, no innovation, no real economic activity, just a financial maneuver designed to make something appear more valuable than it actually is. Capone would have recognized this tactic immediately. The only difference is the venue. Second, look at how risk gets transferred. This is where the comparison to organizations like the Yakuza becomes eerily relevant. In traditional organized crime, one of the key strategies is to push risk onto others while keeping the profits for yourself. The bosses at the top stay insulated while the people at the bottom take all the hits. Corporate buybacks work the exact same way. When a company loads up on debt to finance a massive buyback program, that debt becomes a structural vulnerability. But who bears the consequences when things go wrong? Not the executives who authorized the buybacks and already cashed out their stock options at peak prices. Not the major shareholders who sold at the top. No, the risk falls on the workers who get laid off when the company needs to cut costs. It falls on the pension funds that lose value when the stock eventually corrects. It falls on taxpayers who end up funding bailouts when these over-leveraged corporations become too big to fail. The profits flow upward, the risks flow downward. It's the oldest trick in the organized crime playbook, and it's happening in plain sight. Third, consider the manipulation of market prices. Remember the Libor scandal? That was when it was revealed that major banks had been colluding to manipulate a key interest rate that affected trillions of dollars in financial contracts around the world. It was treated as one of the biggest financial scandals in history. People went to jail. Billions in fines were paid. And yet, what buybacks do to stock prices is fundamentally the same thing. Deliberate manipulation of a price that affects millions of investors and the broader economy. When a company announces a massive buyback program, it's not responding to market forces. It's creating them. It's artificially pushing up the price of its own stock through sheer purchasing power. The mindset behind it is identical to price fixing. The only difference is that one is prosecuted and the other is celebrated. Fourth, and perhaps most damning, look at how the profits are distributed. In any cartel, any organized criminal enterprise, the whole point is to enrich the people at the top. The decisions are made to benefit insiders, not outsiders. The transformation of corporate America over the past 4 decades has created exactly this kind of structure. Executive compensation has become so heavily weighted towards stock-based pay that the people running these companies have overwhelming incentives to prioritize stock price above everything else. They're not building companies for the long term. They're not investing in workers or communities. They're rerunning extraction operations designed to funnel as much wealth as possible to themselves and their fellow insiders. The numbers are staggering. CEO pay has gone from about 30 times the average worker's salary in 1978 to nearly 400 times today. And a huge portion of that increase has come directly from stock-based compensation that buybacks are specifically designed to inflate. When you put all of this together, the journey we've taken through history, through the mechanics of how the system works, through the behind-the-scenes reality of corporate decision-making, you arrive at an inescapable conclusion. What we're witnessing isn't a failure of capitalism. It isn't a few bad actors exploiting loopholes. It's an entire system that has been deliberately constructed to function like organized crime while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy. Wall Street didn't copy organized crime. It refined it. It took the crude tactics of the mob, the artificial scarcity, the risk transfer, the price manipulation, the insider enrichment, and it elevated them into a sophisticated, legally protected, socially acceptable form. The old gangsters had to worry about law enforcement, about rivals, about violence. The new corporate elite faces none of those obstacles. They've captured the regulators, neutralized the opposition, and convinced the public that what they're doing is not just legal but virtuous. The impact of this revelation should fundamentally change how you see the economy, how you see corporations, how you see the decisions being made every day that affect your life. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented, provable, happening right now in boardrooms across America and around the world. If this is hitting you the way it hit me when I first understood it, drop a comment with the words, "refined crime," because that's exactly what we're looking at. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because understanding the problem is only half the equation. Knowledge without action is just frustration. And I refuse to leave you feeling powerless after everything we've uncovered together. The whole point of this journey isn't to make you angry and walk away. It's to transform that anger into something far more valuable: awareness, clarity, and the ability to see through the smoke and mirrors. Here rests the hidden truth that the financial elite desperately hopes you never grasp. Information is the great equalizer. The entire system we've been exposing depends on one critical factor that most people don't understand how it works. The manipulation, the extraction, the behind-the-scenes maneuvering, all of it relies on public ignorance. When the average person hears terms like stock buybacks, their eyes glaze over. It sounds technical, boring, something for economists and Wall Street analysts to worry about. And that's exactly how they want it. Complexity is their camouflage. Jargon is their defense. The more confusing they can make the system appear, the less likely anyone is to question it. But you're not the average person anymore, not after what you've learned here. By understanding these mechanisms, by seeing the patterns that connect modern corporate behavior to the tactics of organized crime, you've crossed a threshold. You've joined the small minority of people who actually comprehend how wealth gets created, transferred, and extracted in the modern economy. And that understanding is power, real power, the kind of power that can't be taken away from you. The mindset shift I'm asking you to make is profound but simple. Stop being a passive participant in a game whose rules you don't understand. Start seeing financial news, corporate announcements, and market movements through a completely different lens. When a company announces a massive buyback program, you'll now recognize it for what it really is. Not a sign of corporate health, but a wealth extraction event. When executives talk about returning value to shareholders, you'll understand who's really benefiting and who's getting left behind. When the market celebrates decisions that gut jobs and freeze wages, you'll see the hidden logic driving those choices. The only defense against manipulation is understanding the play before it happens. Let me say that again because it's the most important takeaway from everything we've discussed. The only defense against manipulation is understanding the play before it happens. You can't protect yourself from a threat you can't see. You can't navigate a system you don't understand. But once you have that understanding, once the revelations we've explored become part of how you see the world, you're operating from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. This doesn't mean you have to become a financial expert overnight. It doesn't mean you need to quit your job and become a full-time market analyst. What it means is that you now have a framework, a way of thinking about corporate behavior in financial markets that cuts through the propaganda. You can read between the lines. You can ask the right questions. You can make decisions about your own finances, your career, your investments with a clarity that most people will never have. The impact of this knowledge extends beyond just your personal situation. When more people understand how the system really works, the system itself becomes harder to sustain. Manipulation thrives in darkness. It withers under scrutiny. Every person who wakes up to these realities, who starts asking uncomfortable questions, who refuses to accept the official narrative without examination, that person becomes part of a growing force that demands accountability. Think about the transformation that's possible if millions of people understood what you now understand. If workers recognized that the company claiming poverty during wage negotiations just spent billions on buybacks. If voters understood why certain policies get passed and others get blocked. If consumers connected the dots between corporate behavior and the prices they pay, the jobs that disappear, the communities that get hollowed out. The decisions being made at the highest levels of corporate America would have to change if enough people were watching, questioning, demanding better. If you want to see what Wall Street doesn't want you to see, if you want to continue deciphering the financial labyrinth that shapes the world around us, then you're in the right place. This conversation is far from over. There are more layers to uncover, more connections to make, more hidden truths to bring into the light. The journey we've started together is just beginning. And here's something I want you to carry with you as we continue. History doesn't repeat itself exactly. The details change, the names change, the specific mechanisms evolve. But the underlying patterns, the fundamental dynamics of power and wealth, those keep cycling through in new forms. History doesn't repeat itself, but it keeps charging interest. The debts of the past, the inequities that were never addressed, the systems of extraction that were never dismantled, they compound over time. And we're all paying the price. If this whole journey has opened your eyes, if you're seeing the financial world differently now than you did before, drop a comment with one phrase. Now I understand the game, because that's what this is all about. So here we are, you made it to the end. And honestly, that says something about you. Most people scroll past, tune out, or get distracted halfway through, but you stayed. You wanted to understand. And that curiosity, that willingness to look deeper when everyone else looks away, that's rare. That's valuable. And I genuinely appreciate you being here. If any part of this conversation resonated with you, if it made you think differently or see something you hadn't noticed before, then we've built something real here. And I'd love to keep that going. Subscribing to the channel isn't about numbers for me. It's just about making sure you don't miss the next piece of the puzzle. Because there's so much more to uncover, and I'd rather do that with people who actually want to be part of the journey. If you want to let me know you stuck around until the very end, drop a quick comment. Just write, I stayed until the end. It's a small thing, but it tells me this conversation mattered to you. And honestly, those comments fuel everything I do here. And hey, if this video earned it, leave a like. Not because I'm asking, but because it helps more people find content like this. Content that doesn't get pushed by mainstream channels. Content that challenges the narratives we're all fed. Now, there's a video right here on the screen that takes this conversation even further. If you're ready to keep going, click on it and continue with me over there. I'll see you in the next one.